and welcome to this edition of the Vermont Report on Palestine-Israel. I'm Mark Hage. It is Monday, September 8th, 2025, day 703 of Israel's genocide in the Gaza Strip. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, since October 7th, 2023, 64,522 Palestinians have been killed. Nearly 164,000 have been wounded or injured. 9,000 are reported missing. The number of Palestinian children killed to date has now surpassed 20,000. The Gaza Health Ministry reports that Israeli forces destroyed 5 high-rise buildings in just the last 72 hours, rendering 4,100 children, women, and elderly homeless. An additional 350 tents, sheltering more than 3,500 Palestinians, were destroyed. There is no end in sight to the slaughter and devastation. The first half of our program tonight will be dedicated to the life and journalism of Anas el-Sharif, who, along with 4 other Palestinian journalists employed by Al Jazeera, were deliberately targeted and killed by Israeli occupation forces. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, quote, Israel is engaging in the deadliest and most deliberate effort to kill and silence journalists that CPJ has ever documented. Palestinian journalists are being threatened, directly targeted, and murdered by Israeli forces, and are arbitrarily detained and tortured in retaliation for their work. Israel has systematically destroyed media infrastructure in Gaza and tightened censorship throughout the West Bank and Israel, end quote. By Al Jazeera's count, more than 270 journalists and media workers have been killed by Israeli forces since October 7th, 2023. Our second report comes from a standard source of information for us, the Listening Post. It documents Israel's latest invasion of Gaza City, which is underway, and it also uncovers new evidence of Israel's efforts to slander and spread disinformation about Palestinian journalists who are working in Gaza. Our third report is quite short. It's produced by the Middle East Monitor, and it retells the story of 5-year-old Hind Rajab in Gaza, who was killed by Israeli troops along with several members of her family. Hind's killing is the subject of a film that recently premiered at the Venice International Film Festival. It received a 24-minute standing ovation, a record in the history of the festival. The film, sadly, but not surprisingly, still does not have an American distributor, even though it won the coveted Grand Jury Prize at this year's Venice Festival. And then we're going to close the program with an interview with Greta Thunberg, performed by Novara Media. She talks about her efforts to organize and support the global Simud flotilla that is sailing soon to Gaza from Tunisia to break Israel's siege on the territory.
In the heart of Gaza, where bombs break the silence, homes lie in ruin, as do the lives of so many. And where screams fill the streets, Anas al-Sharif became the voice of his people. Brave, determined, unwavering.
نحن وجميع الزملاء الصحفيين من حولي سنستمر في التغطية رغم الاستهداف ورغم القصف ورغم عدم توفر أي حماية دولية أو محلية.
Despite constant threats, it was a voice that defied all efforts to be silenced.
الجيش الإسرائيلي من أول شهر في هذه الحرب وجه لي تهديدات مباشرة. رسائلهم تقول: يا أنس الشريف سنقتلك وإلا توقف عن التغطية.
It was a voice that spoke for the starving children, grieving families, and the people forgotten. Anas felt he was carrying the weight of telling the world of Palestinian suffering on his shoulders. He was risking his life to tell the stories of his people.
أصبحت صوت للناس ووصل الجرائم اللي بيفعلها جيش الاحتلال الإسرائيلي بحق الأطفال، بحق النساء، بحق أبناء شعبه.
A journalist feared by those he exposed and admired by those whose stories he told.
أنس تعال تحت الشاشة كيف خلى الكل يحبه، صغير وكبير، الكل بتعلق فيه.
And a man whose legacy will endure well beyond his death. Anas al-Sharif grew up in the Jabalia refugee camp, a city caught in the grip of endless violence. When he was 4 years old, the Second Intifada began. By the time he was 12, he faced the brutality of Operation Cast Lead, a 22-day war on Gaza that left over 1,400 civilians dead. And at 18 years old, the 2014 assault brought new horrors to his doorstep. It was this very backdrop of war that led him to his calling.
طبعاً درست الصحافة في جامعة الأقصى، تخصص إذاعة وتلفزيون. دخلت هذا التخصص.
أنس مش جديد عليه إنه يصور وينقل المعاناة قبل الحرب، من أيام مسيرات العودة وهو بنقل معاناة أهالي غزة.
Anas always had ambitions of being behind the lens, but in October 2023, he found himself on the other side of the camera.
كان طموحي إني أكون أنا مصور على مستوى العالم، لكن مع بداية هذه الحرب انتقلت من عملي في التصوير إلى المراسل الميداني في داخل قطاع غزة.
When thousands were forced to flee northern Gaza, Anas stayed and documented some of the most intense bombardment of the besieged enclave.
رفضت الخروج من جباليا ورفضت الخروج من شمال القطاع نهائياً، وثقت معظم المجازر التي حصلت. أنا وعدد قليل من الزملاء الذين بقوا في شمال القطاع.
It wasn't long before he had become the voice of the north of Gaza.
لما إجا أنس على الشمال وبلش في العمل وبالتغطية الصحفية لحرب الإبادة، رجع الشمال على الأخبار، صار الناس كلها يتابعوا أخبار الشمال أول بأول، وكانوا يستنوا الأخبار دائما منه أخبار الشمال.
His uncompromising reporting drew not just the attention of his people, but the ire of Israeli authorities. He was documenting what they were trying to keep hidden.
كان متعب، يعني متعب لإسرائيل، فأرادت إنه توقف حاجة اسمها أنس الشريف وتقاريره القوية.
الجيش الإسرائيلي من أول شهر في هذه الحرب وجه لي تهديدات مباشرة: يا أنس الشريف توقف عن التغطية في شمال قطاع غزة وتوجه إلى الجنوب وإلا سنقصفك. أيام معدودة بعد هذا التهديد وتم قصف عائلتي بشكل مباشر واستشهد والدي.
A grief-stricken Anas laid his father to rest, once again seen by millions on Al Jazeera. He would not allow this loss to deter him from what he felt he must do. But the targeting of his family was a reminder there could be a very high price to pay for what he and his fellow journalists in Gaza were documenting.
يوم استشهاد والده هو خاف وحس وقتها إنه هذه التحذيرات مش لعبة.
As the genocide continued, Anas would come to know the heartbreak of losing many of his friends and colleagues. Him and his team were repeatedly targeted by Israel. And this shared experience made an already strong bond between them stronger. But one special friendship Anas had developed was with Fadi al-Wahidi. They grew up together, but during the war, they became even closer.
في الحرب قوية علاقتنا بشكل مش طبيعي، يعني صار زي توأم روحي أنس في الحرب. فاهمين بعض، دايما مع بعض، ما بنفارق بعض نهائيا.
A sentiment echoed by Anas.
الزميل فادي الوحيدي هو صديق قبل ما يكون زميل في العمل. كنا وثقنا هاي المجزرة من اللحظات الأولى قدرا كنا في هذه المنطقة، ومن ثم وصلنا العمل سويا طيلة الحرب برفقة باقي الزملاء في شمال قطاع غزة وفريق الجزيرة.
They stayed side by side in northern Gaza, reporting through the devastation. They faced the danger as one and were targeted together.
في هذا اليوم، يوم استهداف الزميل فادي، جاءت الطائرة المسيرة فوق سيارة البث الخاصة بنا وقامت بإطلاق عشرات الطلقات باتجاهنا بشكل مباشر. أنا كنت في وسط الشارع وكان الزميل فادي وكان بقية الزملاء، تفرقنا مسرعين فإذ بطلقة من الطائرة المسيرة بشكل مباشر في الزميل فادي، فسقط على الأرض مباشرة على وجهه.
يا فادي!
في اللحظة الأولى نحن ودعنا فادي أنه شهيد. طبعا كنا لابسين زي الصحافة والجميع شايفنا صحفيين.
A clearly distraught Anas and his team rushed Fadi to the hospital. They stayed by his side for months, hoping not just for Fadi's recovery, but also for their friend to leave Gaza and get treatment. They cared for him. They reassured him. They even celebrated his birthday. Israel blocked Fadi's evacuation repeatedly. It would be 4 months before he was finally permitted to leave. His injuries were life-changing.
أول ما صحيت يعني أنا من الإصابة ما كانوا عارفين إيش فيه، فأنا وقتها بدي أحرك رجلي، بدي أقلب حالي يمين شمال، ففي هذا الوقت ما كنت قادر أعمل شيء. فبقول لهم يعني بقول لهم الحمد لله، كنت مغطى. بقول للزميل كان أنس دائما جنبي، بقول له الحمد لله يعني تنبت رجلي وخلاص صراحة عجلنا رجلي وإن شاء الله بلحقهن. فبقول لي لا الحمد لله موجودات رجليك بس مش معروف إيش اللي معك أنت.
An Israeli bullet completely severed Fadi's spinal cord. It left him paralyzed. His ability to walk taken in an instant. Anas stood beside his colleagues in grief and carried many to their graves. Ismail Ghul and Rami Rifi, killed when an Israeli drone struck their press vehicle while returning from assignment. Hassan Hamad, just 19 years old, killed in a drone strike that targeted him while he was in his bedroom. The killing of any journalist is a war crime, but each of these assassinations were dismissed by Israel with unsubstantiated, barely challenged claims they were affiliated to Hamas, claims repeated with deadly ease. It was a pattern Anas knew all too well, Journalists silenced, one by one.
ونحن فقدنا أكثر من 230 صحفي فلسطيني داخل قطاع غزة. جيش الاحتلال الإسرائيلي دائماً بيحاول يوجه اتهامات ويوجه يكون مجهز المبرر لاستهداف أي صحفي أو استهداف أي شخص في داخل قطاع غزة. وارد أنه يكون دائماً يوجد المبررات لأي استهداف، لأي قصف، لأي تهديد من أجل الوقف عن التغطية.
وممكن أن نخلع هذه الخوذة.
After 15 months of relentless bombardment, the people of Gaza celebrated a fragile ceasefire.
أنا جزء من جسدي خلال هذه المدة وخلال هذه الفترة الطويلة.
Anas was one of the many journalists raised on the shoulders of those whose testimonies he'd shared with the world.
الإعلان ووقف إطلاق النار للمواطنين ولكل سكان غزة الذين.
After weeks of separation, he reunited with his friends and family.
الله، عشان وين؟ ليش بتمشطي لي؟ عشان بتحبيني؟ أنا بموت فيك.
But the joy was short-lived. Just 2 months later, Israel broke the ceasefire. The violence returned with a brutality Gaza had yet to see. Amid the renewed violence, Anas's friend and fellow journalist, Hussam Shabat, was targeted.
خبر استهداف حسام يعني كان يعني زي كأنه واحد من إخوتي أنا فقدت، لأنه أنا كنت أشوفه أكثر من عيلتي وأكثر من أهلي وأكثر من إخوتي.
An Israeli drone struck Hussam's car, clearly marked press, killing him instantly. He was just 23 years old. A devastating reminder of the price journalists in Gaza continue to pay for telling the truth. And a chilling warning to Anas. He could be next.
اللي بعد حسام تم استهداف عدد من الصحفيين. أنا أحد الصحفيين اللي ممكن أتعرض في أي لحظة الآن لاستهداف مباشر، سواء أنا أو عائلتي أو الزملاء اللي معايا في العمل في الفريق.
يا ساتر يا رب.
2 months later, another journalist, Hassan Asliah, was killed in an Israeli airstrike. He had already been attacked a few weeks before.
يا حسن! حسن! يا حسن!
While recovering, Israel bombed the hospital he was being treated in.
حسن صليح في داخل المستشفى اللي بتعتبر مكان آمن استهدفوه داخل المستشفى. فبالتالي في المستشفيات بيتم استهداف الصحفيين، في خيام الصحفيين بيتم استهدافهم، في مراكز الإيواء بيتم استهدافهم، في داخل عربات البث بيتم استهدافهم، في داخل مركباتهم الشخصية، في داخل منازلهم هم مع عائلاتهم. فبالتالي لا يوجد أي مكان آمن لأي صحفي في داخل قطاع غزة.
Since October 2023, more journalists have been killed in Gaza than in any conflict in modern history. Despite tragic losses, relentless danger, and constant threats, Anas carried on reporting with unwavering resolve. For him, it was a responsibility to let the world know the suffering of his people.
أصبحت صوت للناس، يعني الناس مجرد ما إني أتأخر عن حدث ما يقولوا وين أنس؟ ليش أنس ما صورت؟ ليش ما وثقت؟ ورجي العالم يا أنس، استمر يا أنس، تقفش، أنت صوتنا، بدنا إياك. فكانت هذه الكلمات دائما تديني حافز إنه أنا صوت الناس وأنا لازم أوصل رسالة الناس.
استمر يا أستاذ أنس، استمر، أنت صوتنا.
Even when the weight of his responsibility became almost unbearable, it was this encouragement that motivated Anas to continue. Israel had stopped all aid from entering Gaza, and hunger was spreading fast. Anas began documenting the deliberate starvation of his people, exposing not just destruction, but desperation. He knew the world needed to see what Gaza was being forced to endure. As images of starving children reached global audiences, public sentiment started shifting. Israel began to face growing criticism over the humanitarian toll of its actions. Anas's reports were gaining traction, and with that visibility came greater risk.
نقلنا مشاهد الأطفال وهم في حالة صعبة من الانهيار ومن الغثيان وأيضا من سوء التغذية وملامح المجاعة على أجسادهم. كان المشهد لا يوصف، والمشهد كان صعب وقاسي. الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لا يريد للصورة أن تخرج من قطاع غزة.
The threats to Anas became more direct, more frequent, and more severe. He urged the world to protect not just him, but all journalists in Gaza.
بوجه رسالة لوسائل الإعلام الأجنبية والعالمية أن جيش الاحتلال الإسرائيلي يقوم باستهدافنا من أجل إسكاتنا. النجاة ربما وأنا أتحدث معك في هذه اللحظات يتم استهدافي في أي لحظة، على الأقل أن يقوموا بنقل ما نقوم نحن بتوثيقه في داخل قطاع غزة، ويقوموا بنقله لكل العالم ولكل شعوب العالم، وأيضا يشكل حماية لنا نحن كزملاء صحفيين في داخل قطاع غزة ما زلنا محاصرين حتى هذه اللحظة.
His pleas were ignored.
جيش الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الآن يستهدف بوابة مستشفى الشفاء. استهداف قائمة الزميل الصحفي أنس الشريف. والله
On August 10th, 2025, an Israeli drone struck the press tent of the Al Jazeera Arabic team. In one instant, 5 journalists were brutally murdered. The images, too graphic to show. Anas al-Sharif, Muhammad Qreqa, Ibrahim Zahir, Muhammad Nofal, Mu'min Aliwa, silenced in their determined pursuit to show the world the brutality of this assault on Gaza.
خبر استشهاد أناس كسرني كسر، يعني ما وصفلكاش الحالة اللي كنت فيها وقتها. كنت أدعي، يعني شفت جثته أو في أول ما صار كنت أقول لا، كذب يا رب، كذب يا رب، كذب. كنت أدعي يا رب كذب يا رب كذب، إلا أنس يا رب خلينا أنس، يا رب خلينا أنس.
News of Anas's death devastated the people whose voice he had become and outraged the world. The UN and human rights organizations condemned the assassinations of Al Jazeera's journalists. Much of the Western media fixated over baseless questions about Anas's political affiliations, echoing Israel's smear campaign against him. Al Jazeera condemned the killings with fierce urgency, denouncing the violence and calling for global solidarity. The message was clear to those desperately trying to silence the truth. The coverage will continue.
رحم الله الشهداء، رحم الله شهداء الجزيرة، ورحم الله شهداء الحقيقة. إنها الفاجعة، ولكنها الفاجعة التي تولد الإرادة وتولد الصلابة والمضي قدما على طريق نقل الحقائق. نقول إن قتل الأنبياء لم يحل دون انتشار الرسالات. ونقول أيضاً إن قتل الصحفيين لن يحول دون انتشار الحقائق والكلمات.
Anas al-Sharif was a father, a son, a husband, and a friend. He was also a journalist. He carried no weapon. He had no political affiliation. Even in death, his message was clear. The truth must be seen, no matter the cost.
هذه وصيتي ورسالتي الأخيرة. إن وصلتكم كلماتي هذه فاعلموا أن إسرائيل قد This is my will and my final message. If these words reach you, know that Israel has succeeded in killing me and silencing my voice. First, peace be upon you and God's mercy and blessings. God knows I gave every effort and all my strength to be a support and a voice for my people. Ever since I opened my eyes to life in the alleys and streets of the Jabalia refugee camp. My hope was that God would extend my life so I could return with my family and loved ones to our original town of occupied Asqalan, Al-Majdan. But God's will came first, and His decree is final. I have lived through pain in all its details, tasted suffering and loss many times. Yet, I never once hesitated to convey the truth as it is, without distortion or falsification, so that God may bear witness against those who stayed silent, those who accepted our killing, those who choked our breath, and whose hearts were unmoved by the scattered remains of our children and women, doing nothing to stop the massacre that our people have faced for more than a year and a half. Do not forget about Gaza, and do not forget me in your prayers. Anas Jamal al-Sharif.
Israeli forces set their sights on Gaza City as the country's politicians dismiss the growing consensus that what they are inflicting on Palestinians is a clear-cut case of genocide. Targeting journalists with bombs and bullets is not enough for Israeli leaders, who are now pumping even more propaganda into the mix. Plus, our earthly reality that seems more and more like science fiction, and the tech bros working to take us there. This past week, Israel was accused yet again of conducting a genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. More than 100 of the world's leading experts on war crimes added their names to the list of human rights groups and academics who had already drawn that same conclusion. And yet again, Israel dismissed the finding, calling it Hamas-driven, and carried on with its ethnic cleansing of the Strip. Gaza City, where nearly 1 million Palestinians are packed in, is in the midst of being leveled. Journalists are still getting killed, targeted by Israelis, some while working for Western news organizations, one of which, Reuters, actually succumbed to Israeli propaganda even as it reported on the death of its own cameraman. As Gaza is reduced to rubble and the Israeli narrative collapses under the weight of its own contradictions, this story is further shredding the credibility of news sources that people used to believe in. Trust that, like the wasteland that is Gaza, will be challenging, if not impossible, to rebuild. The Israeli military's offensive in Gaza City, the largest Palestinian population center of them all, bears the hallmarks of an endgame. The official Israeli narrative, the city is one of Hamas's last remaining strongholds, and Israel must, quote, defeat the enemy. The real objective, to seize Gaza City, level its neighborhoods one by one, blowing them up, bulldozing them into rubble. Force out the roughly 1 million people who live there and spin the story in ways that make no sense.
במעוזים האחרונים שנותרו בידי החמאס, ובראשם בירת הטרור, העיר עזה.
Through messaging that has grown less disciplined and much less effective.
You basically see a schizophrenic Israeli campaign when it comes to propaganda messaging. They are trying to say that Gaza City is the remaining stronghold of Hamas.
Israel's Security Cabinet instructed the IDF to dismantle the 2 remaining Hamas strongholds in Gaza City and the central camps.
But Israel said the exact same thing about Rafah. They said it about Khan Yunis. They said it about Gaza City before, when they invaded it at least 3 to 4 times. And you're seeing Israeli generals saying this is not true. This is not going to defeat Hamas.
אני מוצא בתוכנית הזאת מספר בעיות ופערים.
Israeli ministers as well stating it. In Hebrew, the message is more clear and honest. It's very straightforward.
בואו נכבוש, נשתלט על כל הרצועה ונעודד הגירה.
The big issue is that hardly anybody in the outside world continues to believe the Israelis. Certainly, normal Western publics have given up entirely on the Israeli narrative. The people who still cling to the narrative are the US government, for example, a few other governments in the West. But these justifications, they fall on deaf ears because they are unbelievable in every possible sense of that term. And the Israelis, of course, they have a different story that they circulate inside their own society, in their media, which is also all about, we have to find what they call the hostages, in fact, prisoners. But of course, materially, what they are engaged in is the destruction of an entire society, and that, of course, is the point.
International pressure is starting to get inside, where we're hearing more and more of incidents where Israelis are kicked out of hotels abroad, where when they sign in with an Israeli passport, people say, we don't want to have you here. So people say, we don't want anything to do with you because of what your country is doing. So Israelis are feeling more and more cornered by international pressure, but internally there's no accountability at all.
One angle keeps surfacing in the coverage of Gaza, typically when confrontations occur between Prime Minister Netanyahu and his subordinates on what Israel should do next.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's new war plan has come under fire from some of the Israel Defense Forces' top brass.
It's the idea that this is Benjamin Netanyahu's genocide, not Israel's. As if citizens of the Middle East's self-declared only democracy should be spared any blame for the war crimes committed in their name, that they are somehow powerless to change Israel's course politically. Anti-war protests there have grown in size, but polls consistently show the vast majority of Israelis still support what their military is inflicting on the people of Gaza. So that narrative that this is all Netanyahu's doing is simply inaccurate, and it distracts attention away from what underpins this genocide, which, when you boil it down, is ethno-nationalism and racial supremacy.
The depiction of the Israeli genocidal project in Gaza as Netanyahu's alone, it serves several different functions. One is to give cover to Israeli society itself. Poll after poll after poll have shown that Israeli Jewish society overwhelmingly supports what the army is doing in Gaza.
אז אני רוצה להגיד תודה לחיילים שלנו שפוצצתם את הבית חולים. ככה עושים, ככה נלחמים. The majority of Jewish Israelis, for example, want to maintain the suspension of humanitarian aid into Gaza. What Israeli society wants is what Israeli society has always wanted, which is the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That's the premise on which the state of Israel was founded. There's nothing new there. But by focusing on Netanyahu, it's as though we can remove the symptom from the cause.
It suits Western audiences, whether that's the media, whether that's institutions of accountability like think tanks, to find a boogeyman, a kind of scapegoat to deal with an unpalatable reality, which is that the majority of Israeli society has become incredibly genocidal, racist in their rhetoric, in their politics.
ואם כבר ישראל מחליטה לחסל את העיתונאים, אז עדיף מאוחר מאשר אף פעם לא.
It's also very self-serving for many of these institutions in the West to delude themselves into thinking that there is still a salvageable segment of Israeli society that they can still speak to.
There's only one real group in Israel that wants this, and that's the hardline, right-wing coalition partners of Benjamin Netanyahu.
But unfortunately, that segment no longer exists, and that's something that a lot of Western institutions, whether that's medias or others, have really failed to grapple with.
Throughout Israel's relentless targeting of Palestinian journalists in Gaza, Western news outlets have repeatedly failed to stand up for the victims, their supposed colleagues. Reuters recently took that a step further. When Hussam al-Masri, a camera operator the agency had hired, and 4 other journalists at the Nasser hospital were killed in an Israeli attack, while al-Masri was live streaming video from the hospital roof.
According to our initial inquiry, there was a Hamas camera. We were tracking it. We cross-referenced it with intelligence, and then we executed a strike against it.
When Israeli spokesmen, already notorious for lying about attacks on journalists, called the source of that live feed a Hamas camera, Reuters rolled over and used that characterization in its own coverage of the attack, language it would later change.
It's the very essence of Israel's genocide in Gaza to go after every single hospital, every single journalist there. And he was bombed for setting up a Reuters camera for live streaming. Reuters knew it was their own camera that is set up there. Reuters didn't even have the courage to say that they bombed our own camera on that rooftop. So the complicity is staggering. It's unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this.
Israel is committing
Genocide in Gaza.
Committing genocide in Gaza.
genocide in Gaza.
Western media outlets had to confront reality this past week when more than 100 of the world's foremost experts on genocide called the assault on Gaza what it is.
Certainly a growing chorus of voices across the spectrum who are saying that what Israel is carrying out in Gaza is not simply a war, but is also a genocide.
Those scholars have finally caught up with what Palestinians have been saying from the start, and what so many others concluded long ago. Bodies like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Israeli rights organization B'Tselem, as well as Israeli scholars. The response from Israeli officials to the statement had a familiar ring to it, that it was, quote, entirely based on Hamas's campaign of lies.
It's the strongest case for genocide in modern history. The denial of it only disgraces and discredits its protagonists. If you see someone saying the Rwanda genocide never happened, or the genocide against the Rohingya never happened, they would be immediately disqualified from the mainstream media, from the public debate, basically.
That's a lie. There is no genocide in Gaza.
But the denial of the genocide in Gaza is still being treated with acceptance, that if you deny the genocide, you increase your chances of being platformed.
So when there is a tribunal and the generals and the leaders that have been orchestrating the genocide will pay the price for it, I think a lot of journalists should be there with them.
האספסוף העזתי, את כל אותם במרכאות בלתי מעורבים, תתי אדם, החלאות, באמת חסרי זכות קיום, הכל שם, רק הוא.
The media has basically been creating the ground on which the genocide can continue.
מגיע לאנשים האלה שם מוות. מוות קשה, מוות בייסורים. אין שם חפים מפשע ברצועת עזה.
When reckoning comes, a lot of people should be charged with complicity, and media outlets should also pay the price.
As we just reported, there is nowhere near enough outrage on Western news outlets over Israel's never-ending slaughter of Palestinian journalists. That has not stopped Israel, however, from ramping up its Hasbara campaign, and this past week it launched a new propaganda push targeting reporters in Gaza. Tarek Nafa has been on this story.
Throughout the genocide, Israeli officials have followed a pattern of smearing Palestinian journalists both before and after their killings.
Many journalists who have reported from Gaza, so-called journalists, are simply terrorists with a press vest on.
Despite condemnations from governments and press freedom groups, the Israelis are doubling down. This past week, Israel's Minister for Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism, Amichai Shikli, launched a new project that claims to, quote, uncover the hidden ties between journalists and Hamas. The website, MediaWatch.legal, uses social media to allege Hamas affiliation through a tangled web of mutual friends and names mentioned in Facebook posts. Initially, the site was pretty sloppy. It contained multiple typos and misidentified journalists with incorrect photos. Those errors may have something to do with the fact that the website was produced using AI. The firm behind it is AI-powered data analytics firm Penlink, which has a long history of working with US law enforcement. At one point, Penlink received a $20 million US government contract to surveil American internet users. Despite its shady background, the new site has been shared widely in pro-Israel circles. The messaging and the graphics bear striking similarities to other pro-Israel doxing websites like Canary Mission and UN Watch, which give off a veneer of legitimacy, but which are really propaganda outfits. Like those sites, Media Watch encourages users to report so-called fake journalists. This is just the latest effort in a years-long campaign by Israel to tarnish Palestinian journalists. Such campaigns are sometimes noted for being slick and heavily funded. This one feels a bit amateurish, and whoever's behind it seems to understand that too. The last time we checked, the website had been taken down for maintenance.
Thanks, Tarek.
For me personally, this is my third attempt to sail to Gaza, deliver humanitarian aid, and break the illegal siege and open up a humanitarian corridor. The first attempt, the boat was bombed a few hours before we could get on board while the crew was still on. And the second time was the Madeleine, where we were illegally intercepted. And Israel once again violated international law by withholding aid from getting into Gaza. And now this is the third time, and now we're coming back with dozens of boats. This is the 38th attempt to break the illegal siege by sea. We are mobilizing with thousands of people from all over the world. Over 26,000 people signed up to join this mission. And we are coming with dozens of boats, with delegations representing over 44 countries. And for me personally, when I was on the Madeleine, and when we were taken, we made it very clear from that second that we will be coming back, and that is a promise, because no matter what the odds are, we have to keep trying. By doing that, we are also upholding our promise to the Palestinians to keep doing everything we can to end this genocide, to end our own complicity in genocide.
Of course, you began in climate justice, climate activism. Now you've extended that to what would be considered more kind of internationalist struggles, class struggles, and so on. Mm-hmm. How does Palestine fit within that framework?
For me, my focus from being a climate justice activist has not shifted at all. I'm still acting in line with the same values. I'm still trying to practice those values as I preach. We are fighting for justice, and in justice that includes the liberation of Palestine, Western Sahara, justice for Congo, Sudan, Kurdistan, etc., etc. We cannot pretend to care about the climate crisis while we ignore the suffering and oppression of people today. If we do so, then that is, in my view, very much racism, that we select which people we care about. If we only care about our white children's future, that is not caring about justice. So for me, I have not shifted focus at all. The first demonstrations I went to was for welcoming refugees to Sweden during the wave of refugees coming from mainly Syria in 2014-15. And that is where I started my so-called activism. So of course, we cannot achieve any justice whatsoever if we exclude Gaza, if we exclude Palestine. People keep asking me, what are the links between climate justice and Palestine, and why do you care about Palestine? I do not understand how people cannot see that connection. In what ways are Palestine and climate justice not connected? Why should I not care about Palestine? I am a human being. I have basic values, common sense. Of course, there are the obvious links between climate justice, environmental destruction, and Palestine, which is wars, occupations, environmental degradation, ecocide, huge emissions, they go hand in hand, as Palestinians know very, very well, by destroying all the conditions to maintain and sustain life, by, for example, destroying cropland, and just pure ecocides are one way of ecological warfare to deprive Palestinians of their means of sustaining life. But also, it should be much more simple that if you care about a habitable planet, you should also care about human well-beings. I'm not a climate activist because I want to save trees or frogs. Like, that is also very important. We should avoid a climate breakdown. But I'm a climate activist because I care about human as well as planetary well-being. And even if we are so selfish that the images from Gaza of people looking for body parts of their lost family members through the rubble, if that doesn't break our hearts and inspire us, not inspire, but motivate us to take action, how can we expect a world that is allowing this to happen, to take a few steps back and act to prevent an ecological and climate breakdown? And also, how can we expect that world to stand up for us when we need it?
You mentioned some of the risks, so the attacks on previous boats and so on, and of course there was the Mavi Marmara in 2010. How do you weigh those risks? Now, given this is the biggest flotilla attempt ever.
Yeah, we are continuously making very thorough risk assessments, and we know that what we are doing now is kind of unprecedented. There hasn't been a mobilization wave exactly like this one before, especially with the land invasion now of Gaza City and the escalating genocide and the escalated blockade and siege on top of the already existing illegal siege. So we know that the uncertainties and risks are very big, but we are knowingly very aware of those risks, saying that we are still doing this. Of course, we are still going to do this. And for me personally, if I can contribute with anything, if I can contribute with a platform or a name that I, for some reason, have reached for, then there is no doubt about what to do, for my sake at least. And we have to remember that Palestinians do not need to be saved. They don't need us to come to their rescue. What we are doing is listening and acting upon the call that Palestinians are making globally for people to stand up, end their complicity, and to step in and compensate for our own governments and people in powers in action. We are loud and clearly saying that the world has not forgotten about Palestine and that our government's atrocities do not represent us in any way.
You know, this is going to be the longest trip. It's going to be like 2 weeks. What's it like on the boat after days and days at sea? Yeah. You know, is there a lot of solidarity?
Yeah, there's a lot of solidarity. You kind of become like a family, because obviously my life is in everyone else's hands, and their lives are in my hands. The actions of one person affect the entire group and can endanger the entire mission. So that's why we are training as much as we can to make sure that everyone is prepared. But yes, there's a lot of solidarity, and that is very inspiring to see this, I would say in many cases, historic uprising, where we are standing united for one cause. We all know why we are here.
Let's talk about the meaning of the flotilla. Obviously, the aims are to deliver aid. But what does it mean symbolically if that doesn't succeed?
This flotilla mission, as well as previous flotilla attempts, of course, the main objective is to deliver desperately needed humanitarian aid that Israel is actively preventing from getting into Gaza and therefore deliberately starving an entire population, but also to break Israel's illegal siege that is unlawful by all international law, and to try to open up a people's humanitarian corridor. Those are the concrete objectives with this trip. But of course, it means more than that. We are also trying to deliver hope and solidarity by again, showing that the world is stepping up. We are not forgetting Gaza. We keep our eyes on Gaza. We keep talking about Gaza in every way that we can, using all the tools we have at hand.
Some people have said that your public profile has kind of shrunk a bit since you started talking about Palestine.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the case? And if so, why?
For sure. Like I would say it's a very, very clear difference. And of course, I and my other friends and comrades were talking about social justice way before October 2023. But it was then that the media decided that, oh, now they're radicalized, now they've shifted focus. And it's like, no, we were talking about system change and social justice from the beginning. You weren't just picking out on those things. You were portraying us as angry kids talking about our future, which we also did. But so that is a constructed narrative by the media, the same media that put us in that position, us versus the status quo. We were the radical ones talking about science, and it was portrayed as our opinions, when it was what the current best available science was saying and is still saying. Yeah, I think every day I get approached by people saying like, why have you shifted focus? And we will not invite you to this event, or you're too controversial, you're too political, or they invite me to things and say, you can talk about climate, you can't talk about politics. And it's like, what world are you living in? So I would say it is a very clear distance. And also the general media attention. It was a much more comfortable narrative with the angry kids being afraid of their future that was being taken away from them, versus people who are actually grown up and are calling out the systems that we want to overthrow.
What would climate justice look like for the people of Gaza? Now, I mean, given where we are, that's a very difficult question.
Yeah, what it would mean, it would first stop the occupation, breaking of the siege, ending the apartheid state, and that everyone can live with freedom, dignity, and justice from the river to the sea.
So J.D. Vance's mentor, Palantir founder and tech billionaire Peter Thiel, I think that's how you pronounce his surname, recently referred to you, apologies in advance, as the Antichrist in an interview with the NY Times. Are you aware of this? And what's your response?
I think someone mentioned it. I mean, risking now that people are thinking that I don't take anything serious, but it is hilarious. Like, why are they spending their time slandering young people who are just trying to say the common sense and fighting for the bare minimum? It's like they wouldn't be doing that if they didn't feel threatened by us and this uprising that we are a part of. But yeah, it's a huge source of entertainment for me as well. So. Thank you for that.
Good, great. Glad to hear it.
Why did this film break the record for the longest standing ovation at nearly 24 minutes? And who is it about? The film, The Voice of Hind Rajab, premiered at the Venice Film Festival on Wednesday. It tells the story of Hind Rajab, the 5-year-old Palestinian child who became a symbol of Israel's atrocities in Gaza. Her story began on January 29, 2024, when Israel's military told residents of Gaza City to evacuate immediately. So Hind's family got in a car and began to drive north. But a few hundred meters later, they stopped. Hind's 15-year-old cousin Leanne called her uncle to tell him they were surrounded and Israel's army had opened fire on the car, killing everyone inside apart from her and Hind. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society, or PRCS, made contact with Leanne that afternoon.
الو مرحبا. ايوه بتدخل علينا. الدبابة جنبك. انتوا متخبيين؟ في السيارة احنا جنبينا الدبابة. انتوا جوا السيارة؟ Hello? Hello?
62 gunshots could be heard over just 6 seconds as Leanne screamed for her life, and the call ended in just under a minute. The PRCS called back immediately and Hind picked up.
ميتين؟ وهم هلا معك بالسيارة؟ هي جاية عليكي من قدام السيارة الدبابة؟ قريب كتير؟ كتير. وعم تمشي؟ طيب ما بدنا نخاف.
خليكي معي.
أنا معك يا عمري.
The Red Crescent got permission from Israel's defense ministry to send an ambulance to try rescue Hind, but as the ambulance turned onto Hind Street, explosions were heard and the line dropped. The paramedics were no longer responding. Hind was still on the call, alone and surrounded by the dead bodies of her family members. It was beginning to get dark. The Red Crescent had gotten her mother on the phone. They all did what they could to get her to keep talking, but she began to fall silent for long periods of time. When they asked why she wasn't speaking, she said, "Every time I talk, blood comes out of my mouth and makes my clothes dirty, and I don't want my mum to have to clean it." They told her to stay in the car where they could find her, and that if night comes and they still haven't arrived, she should close her eyes so she doesn't see the tanks.
حبيبتي والله لو بإيدي رأجيكي.
The call broke off shortly after. They tried to call again and again, but no one answered. No one could reach the area for nearly 2 weeks. Once they did, they saw the Red Crescent ambulance that had come to try rescue her was a burned-out shell, with almost nothing remaining of the paramedics' bodies. Further up the street, the door and parts of the hood from Hind's car had been torn off. The windows were blown out and it was covered in bullet holes. A total of 335 bullets had been fired at the car. The body of Hind's uncle was still dangling from the driver's seat. The car smelled of decomposing corpses from the dead bodies of the 5 children piled together in the back seat. The family was buried together outside Al Shifa Hospital, and their murder became a rallying cry for activists around the world. Students raised awareness about Hind on university campuses worldwide, and the Hind Rajab Foundation was set up to prosecute Israeli soldiers accused of war crimes internationally. When Tunisian filmmaker Kauthar Ben-Hania heard the audio recording of Hind, she decided to drop everything and make the film, saying, "I cannot accept a world where a child calls for help and no one comes." She got the full 70-minute audio from the Red Crescent and testimonies from Hind's mother and others who had been over the phone, reconstructing the story. Once it was underway, names like Brad Pitt, Joaquin Phoenix, Rooney Mara, Jonathan Glazer, and Alfonso Cuarón signed on as executive producers. It was then nominated for the Golden Lion, the highest prize given to films at the Venice Film Festival, to mark important contributions to cinema. In a time where people are constantly exposed to short bursts of violence and suffering online, Ben-Hania focused on the retelling of violence through Hind's voice rather than video. In this way, she said, cinema can preserve a memory.
As always, thank you for watching. This has been the Vermont Report on Palestine, Israel. I'm Mark Hage, and we'll see you soon.